Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of Military Money Mistakes Live. I'm still me, you're still you, and appreciate you taking the time to sit down and chat or listen to me chat to you today. Um, Big thing, you've probably been reading about this in the news, what we're going to talk about. Maybe you've seen some of these things that are we're going to discuss today with regards to the debt ceiling. That's kind of what we're going to the overall topic of today. But before we get into that, wanted to real quick, you know, get out there, put out the word about the Insiders Portal if you haven't checked it out yet. If you're within a couple of years of getting ready to retire from the military and you want some information that goes above and beyond what you don't get at TAP, uh, all the stuff. Obviously, if you've been through it, TAP is where they talk about all of the things that the military does for you or that the U.S. government does for you after your retirement. What they don't talk about is everything else that's available to you out there. And so we've kind of created our own space where we can put information out there that maybe show you some alternatives to some of the things you'll hear about in TAP. That's called the Military Retirement Blueprint. You can go to it by visiting that website right there and check it out. Jump in. You don't have to pay anything. You might get a couple of emails here and there. If Scott's playing around with the email thing tool, he might accidentally send you a couple more emails than you want, but that's about it. So, other thing too, that you can go militaryretirementblueprint.com. There's also an invite link inside the about section here. So you can go check that out. One other thing, too, before we get started, reminder about the pilot group that I'm starting. So, for Military Money Mistakes, the coaching program, if you're within 2 years of retirement for the military, that's kind of who it's designed for. But if you fall outside of that, that doesn't mean you can't get some value out of it. We're looking for folks to join the pilot group. So if you do become part of that group, you will have access to it for free for life. Everything that we do, anything new comes out, you'll have access to that without having to pay for it. So you can also do that. You can join that inside the portal, or you can. I have a link there in the about section where you can set up a call with me and set up an interview to do that. So uh, on to today's topic that I wanted to get into. If you've been following the news, there's some talks between the White House and the congressional leadership about extending the debt ceiling. Uh, a lot of people have, I'm trying to not make this political. This isn't about policy. It's about the effect that this is going to have on veterans, especially military retirees and people who are collecting VA disability income. But essentially, to summarize it, on June 1st, the government won't be able to fund any of their obligations right now because they can't extend the debt ceiling. Some people say June 1st. I've read other people that say maybe it's June 8th or June 9th. Obviously, there's a lot of going back and forth between the two parties, lots of throwing rocks at each other, accusations being thrown around. But regardless of who is trying to blame who for whatever's going on, it's important to know, like, hey, what's the impact of this going to be if it happens? So if you're not familiar with what the national debt is, basically it's the accumulation of spending deficits from the entire life of the U.S. government. Basically, there's two ways that we can reduce those deficits to stop the national debt from growing. Right? We can either reduce spending, which is becoming harder and harder to do, or we can increase taxes, which is increasingly less and less popular. Today I think we're sitting at about $31.8 trillion is our national debt. 100 years ago, 400 billion. So over the course, I didn't do the math to see what the increase in percentage was, but that's a lot. Um, over the last 100 years, we've gone from 400 billion to 31.8 trillion. The biggest single year increase in the national debt obviously came as a result of COVID, right? Over $4 trillion in debt. And a lot of that came from programs that were put in place during COVID, like the PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program, all these different things. We had to, on top of that, we had to print what did we print? Something like a ridiculous amount of the money that's ever been printed was printed over the last 4 years, which also drove up inflation. So you can see all of these things. A couple weeks ago, I had an episode on understanding why it's, why is it important for you to understand basic economics? Situations like this are key for that. So, the national debt, I think, what was it? Just the interest alone accounts for $460 billion of the federal government's budget for this year, just paying the interest on that $460 billion. So, how does this, why are we in this situation right now? Tons of stuff. I mean, we're sending tens of billions of dollars overseas all the time for all these different aid packages. Not that some of those things benefit us greatly. Some of those maybe not. Maybe people are doing favors for other people. But, there's some big arguments right now. The House Republicans want to reduce spending. They want to put a cap on increases in spending throughout the federal government next year. And the White House is saying, hey, we don't want to cut these programs. I saw some things where they're trying to spin it. And this is kind of what got this episode started today. There was some social media posts out there from the White House where they said, well, hey, they want to cut benefits for veterans and service members, and because they want to cut everything, right? They're saying they're looking for like a 22% reduction in spending. They say that there are specific things that they're looking at from what I've read on the subject. One of the big things was they want to put the hold or maybe lessen the amount of spending that they're putting out there to hire those 87,000 extra IRS agents. That obviously the government, I had a discussion about this with somebody not too long ago about these additional IRS agents. And they said, well, yeah, it's so we get all those ultra rich people to pay more in taxes. And I just thought it was kind of funny. Like, as we were discussing this, like, you understand that those people they're still going to pay the minimum. Like, what they're doing right now isn't illegal. They're doing everything legally. These are people who have the resources to hire teams of attorneys to make sure that they're reducing the amount of taxes they have to pay legally. And, it didn't seem to click with them like, oh, okay, well, probably what's a more likely scenario is that they're going to go back and look at all these other people who don't have teams of attorneys working for them and, dig a little deeper on them, because now they'll have the resources to look at more people. Well, guess what? Most military retirees, if you do 20 years in the military and then you go out and you get another job where you were making what you were before, now you're making twice as much as you did while you were in the military. You are a prime candidate for, the IRS to come look at it. Say, oh, okay, well, this person's income basically just doubled. Now there's a lot of tax benefits that you lose after you leave the military. There's state income taxes. Now there's some that you gain too, personal property tax exemptions and things like that. But, your tax situation is going to change. And I've got another episode planned on that where I'll talk about some of the changes you can expect from a taxation standpoint after you retire from the military. But essentially, that was one of the big things that they wanted to do, was reduce the amount of IRS agents that they're going to hire with however many billions of dollars that was. But that gets us to the next piece of the conversation, the debt ceiling. So the debt ceiling, if you're not familiar with what that is, it's the restriction on the amount of money that on the amount of debt that the U.S. government is allowed to maintain. And that's controlled by Congress. And so if they fail to raise that debt ceiling, that means that there's going to be a lot of programs that won't be able to be funded after the deadline, which right now is June 1st. There is the 14th Amendment. If you're not familiar with this, there's been a lot of discussion about this too. The president has the power to override the debt ceiling under the 14th Amendment. However, that only applies to current obligations, things that have already been approved for spending. They can't go after any new programs. And so essentially what happens is if they fail to raise the debt ceiling, the U.S. government could essentially default on its debt. It's not going to be able to pay those interest payments on all of that debt. And if that happens, that could have some pretty disastrous effects on the U.S. economy, because one of the biggest, you know, pillars of strength with the U.S. economy is that the U.S. government always pays its debts. So if they were to default on that debt, that would be disastrous for the entire economic system. It wouldn't matter, there would be so many things that would go wrong. We would, essentially, a lot of people would say, hey, that would put us into a recession, while there's a lot of other people out there who say, hey, guess what? We're already in a recession. I guess it just depends on what shade of lipstick you want to put on that pig, as we would say where I grew up. But essentially, yeah, that could be very bad, especially for all these people who are already retired and living off of their retirement savings. That could be really nasty for them. Let's see here. We got a comment hopping in here. Let's see here. Jacob Anderson's talking about, I think Republicans will get most of the agenda through, and I think this thing will work out. So that was kind of my thing that I was going to get to at the end. I'm optimistic. What's the word? I'm hopeful that they will get through as well. I think this will come to a resolution, but I wanted to talk about, like, hey, here's some of the things, the risk, and here's what you can do the next time, because I feel like this isn't the last time this is going to happen. So I wanted to also talk about, like, hey, here's what you can do to prevent that here in the future. So Jacob, thanks for pitching in there. I do agree with you on that. And I do also like the Real AF podcast as well. It's one of the ones I listen to. So let's get to the brass tacks here. Why is it important to military retirees and veterans? Well, June 1st is the deadline. That's also the day that the two of the first bills that would be due on June 1st are about $12 billion in veterans benefits that wouldn't get funded. That's your VA disability. It's, all the stuff that takes care of all those federal veterans benefits that you have. And then the other is another $12 billion in military and federal employee pensions. And so for a lot of retirees, those are two big things that are a huge part of your income, and maybe even you're depending on to support your let's see here. Bob doesn't trigger a default. Bob Latham's chiming in here, which I always like to hear what Bob says, because he's been doing this a lot longer than me. Doesn't trigger the default necessarily. That's true. It does force the government to balance the spending income. Politicians spin the language. We should call it what it really is. The government has a spending problem. That's true. Maybe I would say maybe I should get the federal government to buy the Military Money Mistakes Coaching Program, but I don't want to raise that debt up anymore. So, those two big things, right? The military pension and VA disability. Guess what? For millions of veterans, that is a huge part of their monthly income. And unfortunately, that's the whole reason that I created this to begin with, as I'm building this thing out, is I talk to way too many military retirees who get out and are living paycheck to paycheck, right? Instead of, this is one of the things that I say all the time, like, instead of, hey, guess what? Now you're making twice as much as you were before. You have this amazing opportunity to improve your situation. A lot of them don't, right? Instead they make their life, they've got this huge increase in income. Well, they expand their lifestyle to meet that, and then they put themselves in the same position as they were before, because they think that they're 100% safe. And well, I think a lot of that confidence is being shattered now for a lot of people. Certainly I'm not scared, but I'm still kind of like, in the back of my head, I'm like, okay, well, this is something that maybe isn't as much of a surefire bet as I thought it was in the past. I need to do even better than I am right now at preparing myself for more situations like this. So I don't care. So I don't care if it happens, right? No big deal. If this income stream comes goes away, I have 2 or 3 others that will support me too. So some of the other things too. Here's a couple. If you're already a retiree, June 2nd, there's a $25 billion bill for Social Security. A lot of people depending on Social Security. $47 billion for Medicare on June 1st, $1 billion in tax refunds on June 1st, and then $4 billion in federal salaries on June 9th. All those bills that, again, too, like some of the other people in here have said, I think that they're going to come to something before the deadline. I think there's a lot of theater out there right now. That's what politicians do very well, is a lot of political theater with, trying to play the blame game, especially right now with the election coming up next year. Lots of pointing fingers, lots of trying to say these other guys are bad. We're the good guys. We're here to help you out. So, what do we get to, right? What can you do right now to make sure you don't get in hopefully the situation resolves itself, but if it doesn't, what can you do? Well, prepare yourself, not just for now, but for next year or the year after that, or the year after that. Right now, stop making any unnecessary purchases. That includes like your little Amazon things. Those pile up. Military Money Mistakes course. I do a thing where one of the things we do is I say, hey, I want you to write down everything that you've spent money on for the next 30 days. And then we're going to go through and we're going to look at it. We're going to categorize it. And then people are going to look at that and they're going to say, oh, wow, I spent 5% of my monthly income on whatever weird coffee drinks or something, right? And when you start to keep track of that stuff, you start to reduce the amount, because then that has the other behavioral effect of like, oh, I have to write this down if I buy it, so I'm not going to buy it, right? So stop making unnecessary purchases. If you're not sure what that is, give me a call. I will outline it for you, I promise. Always make sure that you have liquid savings. The general rule of thumb is that, they say 6 months worth of expenses. It's different for everybody. There's a lot more that goes into it too. How strong, how many sources of income do you have? Like but obviously the more liquid savings you have, that's a big portion. Cause I talk to so many people that are only saving money for retirement. They're not saving for all that time in between right now and when you retire, which is a huge mistake. And then, if what's going on right now makes you nervous, you might want to consider some lifestyle changes. If you're afraid that you're not going to be able to afford your lifestyle right now because of something like this happening, then you might want to go back and reconsider that. And so I did write this down. I want to share this with you guys because I do like to write stuff all the time, right? And I wanted to share this with you before we close out. The opportunity that we have as military retirees is unparalleled compared to anything else in the world. But right now, we're finding out that even one of our biggest advantages isn't as secure as maybe we thought it was initially, right? If you're not properly taking advantage of that opportunity right now, as early and as often as possible, you could be setting yourself up for failure down the road. So just like my thoughts on this whole thing, appreciate all these guys jumping in here, especially Jake and Bob for commenting. Appreciate that. We'll be back next week. Not sure what we're going to talk about. Hopefully, I'll be able to afford to come back on here next week because I'll get my pension and VA disability check. I'm just kidding. I'll actually be good no matter what. But I hope everybody else is too out there. So again, real quick reminder about the pilot group. If you're interested in joining that, there's a link down in the about section you can click on. Set up a call with me. Figure out, hey, is this something that would be beneficial to you? And you'll get access to that for free for life. And also, don't be afraid to go check out our insiders portal, militaryretirementblueprint.com, where we'll go talk about all the alternatives to a lot of the stuff that they'll tell you about in TAP class. So that's it for the day. I hope everybody has a great Memorial Day weekend. I'm pretty sure we will too. I think we're going to stay at home because of all the crazy stuff that goes on out in the world there more and more lately. So we're just going to chill out here in the neighborhood and have a good time. So take care, everybody. Have a good weekend.